Yay, hello. All right. Welcome. Today I am going to be talking about how to remove other people's projections from your worldview. How to take other people's projections and literally delete them from the way that you see the world. So I'm going on Facebook Live right now at the same time that I'm on Instagram Live. So just let me know if you guys can hear me, if you have any trouble, if there's interference. And I'm going to be switching back and forth between the two cameras. And I'm also going to post this to YouTube. So we've got lots of cameras going on here. So again, today what we're going to be talking about is how to delete other people's projections from your world view. Now this is something very different from what I normally talk about, because normally everything we talk about is how we can take 100% responsibility for our actions. But today, this conversation is going to be about how we can see when something is not our responsibility, and in fact, when something is not ours to begin with, and being able to identify when projections are from somebody else and when they are from us. It's really important to be able to make that distinction, because once you know where it's coming from, then you can identify it and you can look at it as an object that's outside of you, and then you can remove it. As soon as you're able to look at something, objectify something, identify something, then you are no longer identified with it. It no longer is you. So today we want to talk about how to identify what the projections are that other people have put on us, and then be able to challenge them and remove them, so that they no longer are affecting our worldview. They no longer are limiting what we see is possible for ourselves. So to start, let's talk about what a projection is, all right? So I'm going to go to some trusted definitions here for a minute. So a projection is when somebody else projects their unconscious feelings, thoughts, and motivations onto us. So projections are involuntary. They're an involuntary transfer of our own unconscious behavior onto others. It's like a vomit of somebody else's unconsciousness onto you that sticks to you. And when we're projecting on somebody else, it appears that that quality actually exists in the other person, but really that person is just acting as a mirror for us and is showing us what we don't like about ourselves, what unconscious gunk we've been avoiding having to deal with, we've been avoiding owning up to, that we then just project onto somebody else. So it's attributing parts of ourselves that we don't like to other people as a defense mechanism, so that we don't have to own up to it and accept that it's actually part of us. So whatever we don't own about ourselves, we end up projecting onto other people. That's what a projection is. It really comes from this idea that we only see what we are. We only see what we are. The outside world is just a mirror for us. So when we look at somebody else and we have a problem with that person, we project that problem onto them, but really that's just the issue that we have with ourselves that we think is over there with them, but really it's over here with us, and we're just projecting it onto them so we don't have to take responsibility for it in ourselves. However, today we are not talking about how to stop projecting on other people. That's normally what I would be talking about, but today we're actually talking about how to identify the ways that other people have projected on you and remove them. And in doing so, when you remove other people's projections from yourself, then what often happens is you stop projecting on other people. All right, are y'all with me? Can you hear me? Okay, cool. So the way that I like to think of projections is, who are my Harry Potter fans out there? Anybody? Do you guys remember what a boggart is? A B-O-G-G-A-R-T, a boggart? Projections are like boggarts. So a boggart is like a shapeshifter that lurks in dark spaces, that has no definite form and is like this amorphous dark blob. And it just takes the shape of that which is most feared by the person who encounters it. So when it identifies your fear, it takes the shape of that, okay? That's what a projection is. It's you looking at another person, and that person ends up taking the shape of what you most dislike about yourself. And then you see that fear in that other person. You think it's out there with them rather than over here with you, and then you react to it and you project on that person. So for my Harry Potter fans, a projection is basically like a boggart that takes the shape of our deepest fear that we project onto somebody else. All right, are y'all with me? Can you hear me? Cool. So The reason today we're talking about how to identify somebody else's projection on you is because I'm realizing that a lot of my community, a lot of the people that listen to my videos and interact with me are people who are already very prone to take responsibility for the way that other people interact with them. Like, we take responsibility for everything. If someone's mean to us at the grocery store, we're like, oh my gosh, that definitely was a function of the way that I was being. So what can I do to clean that up? And that's awesome, and that's so powerful, and that's so important. But the downfall to that is that we can't identify when somebody else is projecting on us, and therefore we can't remove the projection, because you have to be able to identify it as a projection before you can remove it. Just like a boggart in Harry Potter. Do you guys remember what they do when they realize that it's a boggart? They have to call it out, and they have to realize that it's a boggart and say you're a boggart before it can disappear. So it's the same thing with projections. We have to be able to know that it is a projection before we can disappear it. And when we're so stuck taking 100% responsibility for everything, we sometimes can't identify somebody else's projection, and then we're stuck with it because we're trying to take responsibility for it. But the whole point is that it's not ours. So you can't take responsibility for something that was not yours to begin with. So today's live video is about realizing that it is not enlightened to take responsibility for somebody else's projection on you. And I want to read to you an oracle card that I drew like months ago that I refer back to all the time, and it has been so important for me to get this message, because I'm somebody who always thinks that if somebody else is being mean to me, it means something about me. So what the oracle card says is that, have you ever noticed that people have different reactions to the sun? Some worship the sun, others respect it, and some fear it. These reactions are about the belief systems and consciousness of the people, not the nature of the sun itself. The sun is exactly the same, whether it is recognized for its health-giving properties or for being destructive to health. The sun is powerful, and it continues to shine and simply be what it is, unaffected by the reactions that other people have to its light. So you are like the sun, and if you are deciding whether or not to be who you are, whether or not to shine your light based on the reactions of those around you, then you will be forever confused. There will always be those who admire and support you, and there will always be those who, for their own fearful reasons, will undermine you. And if you are deciding whether or not to be who you are based on the reactions of those around you, then you're going to end up undermining yourself, and you're going to allow their negativity to become a part of how you view yourself. Being responsible for your own responses to the world is appropriate. However, assuming that the consciousness that another chooses for themselves is your doing is not appropriate. If you do this, then you are colluding, you are conspiring, you are co-creating with fear. You are agreeing that it is appropriate behavior for another person to blame you for their pain. Okay? This is not wise, this is not true, this is not enlightened, and this is not empowering for anybody. Okay? So it's important that we understand and we be able to identify when somebody is projecting on us, so that we can identify it as a projection and we can delete it from our consciousness so that it is no longer running the show. One of the most important groups of people in our lives that project on us in ways that are so all-consuming that we can't even see them are, of course, our parents. Most of our projections that limit our perspective come from our parents, because they have been projecting on us for so very long, since before we can remember, that their projections become the water that we're swimming in. It's so all-consuming, it's like air. You forget that air is there, and you don't normally identify that you're in the midst of air because it is all around you. So you're like, what air? It's just everywhere. So it's hard to see it. And that's like what our parents' projections are. They've been so consistent. They've been such a consistent part of our worldview that we've lost awareness of the fact that these are projections from our parents, and they just completely run the show. So I want to talk today about a couple examples of ways that parents have projected on us that we've internalized and that we've been thinking are us. We've been identifying with those projections. So one of the projections that I find is really common that I encounter with a lot of my clients is the projection that hurting oneself is the best way to get attention. This is a projection that parents lead by example. So because parents have the belief that they're supposed to always be strong and always be available for their kids, they often don't allow themselves to communicate their own needs, and then they do self-inflicting punishment, self-sabotaging behavior, where the only way that they know that they can communicate their pain is by hurting themselves, is by not giving themselves the time that they need, is by suffering, is by getting themselves into a hole of not being taken care of, and using that depletion of themselves to communicate what they actually need. And so what this projection results in is belief in the kids that hurting myself is the best way to get attention, and that if I'm totally nourished and taken care of, then I don't deserve love and nobody's going to pay attention to me and I'm going to get ignored. So I have to keep hurting myself and I have to keep depriving myself of my own needs in order for me to get attention. All right, so that's one example of a projection that's really common that parents put on us. Another example of a projection is you need my approval in order to feel good about yourself and your choices. You need my approval in order for you to feel good about yourself and your choices. So this projection is what I call having an internalized authority figure. Our parents become the voice in our heads through which we filter all of our actions. So we don't actually, maybe our parents aren't even around anymore. The person doesn't need to still be around in order for them to be an active projector on you, because we just internalize their opinions, we internalize their projections, and we filter all of our actions through it. So, we do something and then subconsciously we think, oh my gosh, would my parents have approved of this? No, they wouldn't have approved of it, so therefore I have to feel ashamed. So we impose negative emotions on ourselves as an act of self-inflicting the punishment that we think our parents might have given us. And so again, this projection is you need my approval in order to feel good about yourself and your choices. So the third projection that I want to talk about today that parents often project onto us is the projection feeling good is bad. Feeling good is bad. Again, this comes from parents' shame complex around feeling good and parents feeling like they have to be a martyr. So then they project onto us that anything that makes you feel good, anything that gives you pleasure is bad, and you're not supposed to have that. Which again is this internalized authority figure, this voice in our head through which we filter all of our actions, and we try to decide, oh my gosh, does this mean that I'm selfish? The fact that I just did this, does this mean that I'm selfish? Does this mean that I'm gross? Does this mean that I'm bad? Does this mean that I'm taking from other people? And so we get in our own way of our joy and what gives us happiness and pleasure because of this internalized authority figure voice, because of this projection that says that feeling good is bad. So those are just 3 examples of projections. So the first one is hurting myself is the best way to get attention. The second one is you need your parents' approval in order to feel good about yourself and your choices. And the third one is feeling good is bad. So now that I've given you a couple examples of projections, now you can start to figure out what are the projections that are on you. What are the beliefs that you have taken from other people in your life? Again, mostly parents, probably, but also could be friends, could be past partners, could be current partners, could be siblings, could be coworkers, could be bosses. Most often, we're most susceptible to projections when it's from an authority figure. So think through, your teachers, your principal, your boss, whatever authority figures have been in your life. What were the takeaways that you have taken from that relationship? What are the beliefs that you have inherited from that person? So you want to start getting really clear about these beliefs. And some of them are good, all right? Some of them are really good. And that's awesome. But you want to get clear on what they all are so that you can really actively choose them. Because if it's a projection, even if it's good, you haven't chosen it for yourself. So even if somebody has projected onto you, you should feel joyful. If that's a projection, then that's still an imposed belief that's coming from something outside of yourself. That's not something that you've discovered for yourself. So it can still be limiting. So that's why you want to get clear and write out all of the projections that you can identify, and then you can go back through and you can figure out which ones you want to keep and which ones you want to delete, destroy, and uncreate, which we'll talk about in a minute. But the ones that are good, now you have the opportunity to choose that for yourself and to take the power back, to take it from being a projection to being a creation. So when you are living inside of projections, you're not creating. You're living in reactive mode. You're not living in creative mode. So once you're clear about what all the projections are, then you can choose the ones that you want and create from them, and you can let go of the ones that you don't want. So the first thing to know, once you've identified a projection, once you realize, oh, this thought, this belief, this thinking pattern has not come from me. That's the first most important thing to recognize, is just, this isn't mine. This is not mine. It's kind of like somebody, this is a very strange example. I'm sorry, my brain comes up with awkward metaphors sometimes, but if somebody dropped off alien children on your porch and you've been taking care of those alien children for years and years and years, thinking somehow that they were your children. And then all of a sudden you realize, wait a second, these aren't my kids, these are aliens, oh my gosh. Once you realize that, then you can separate yourself from it, and it doesn't have as much power over you because you get that it's not yours. This is an alien child. This is not my child. I did not create this. So the first thing to do when you identify a projection is to tell yourself, this isn't mine. All right. So remember earlier we talked about buggerts in Harry Potter. What's the first thing that they do? They have to identify that it's a buggert, because before they identify that it's a buggert, they think that it's real. They think that it's their real fear that's showing up outside of themselves. No, it's not your real fear. It is a projection. So identify it. Tell yourself, this is an alien child. This is a buggert. This is not mine. This is a projection. And as soon as you see it, it's no longer you. As soon as you identify a projection, it no longer has power over you, because now you've seen it as an object rather than as the subject that is you. And now there's a separation between you and it. And once you can see it as a projection, then you see it as not fact. And once you see it as not fact, then now you have the power to alter it to be whatever you want it to be. So the first step is to identify it as a projection. And now the second step is to replace it. So once you have your list of all of the projections that you've identified that other people have put on you, now you can go through and you can say, okay, what is the best feeling replacement that I can create for this projection? So for example, the first example of a projection we went over is that hurting myself is the best way to get attention. So once you've identified that as a projection, now you can question it, you can challenge it, you can change it, you can recreate it. So you can replace it with something like, actually, being healthy will allow other people to connect to me and love me more. Being healthy and caring for myself and being nourished and being happy is going to get me a better kind of attention than hurting myself is ever going to give me. It's going to get me loving connection rather than concern. I can ask for what I need, and I don't need to use self-destruction as a cry for help, because I can go out and get it. So that's an example of how you can create a replacement for the projection. And now every time you notice that that thought pattern is coming up, you can interrupt it, you can name it, say, you are a projection, you are not mine, I did not create you, and then you can fill in the blank with your replacement that you actually did create. The second example of a projection that we went over is that you need my approval in order to feel good about yourself and others and your choices. So what kind of replacement would you make up for that? I can feel good about whatever I want to feel good about. How's that for a replacement? I choose my choices and I choose what I want to feel good about, and I don't need to filter my choices through anybody else's perception in order for me to earn the right to feel good about my choices. That's a pretty good replacement for that projection, right? And then the last projection we talked about is feeling good is bad. Again, what do you want to replace that with? You did not create that. That was not yours. You did not invent the belief that feeling good is bad. That was a projection that you inherited from somebody else. It's an alien child. It's a buggert. It's not yours. So call it out for what it is and then replace it with something that you actually want. So replace it with the belief that feeling good is wonderful. By me feeling good, I can be more generous. By me feeling good, I'm nourished, I'm more available, I'm more present, I'm more joyful, I'm more free to create what I want to create in the world. Replace it with whatever belief is going to feel the best for you, okay? So those are the steps to you having power over other people's projections and you creating the projections for yourself. So I just saw a question here that is, why do projections occur in the first place? So projections occur, and we talked about this in the beginning of the video, so you can go back and you can watch the whole live stream. Projections occur because somebody else is unwilling to own up to their own unconscious behavior. They're unwilling to own up to their own shadow, and so they project it onto us because they don't want to see it in themselves, and we are acting as a mirror for them. And then we internalize that projection because it's coming from an authority figure whom we respect or whom we think that we should listen to. So we internalize it as fact, and then it goes into the background where we no longer see that it was from an outside source, and we start believing that it's fact, that it's truth, and we start identifying it as if it's our own creation, even though it was from somebody else. That's why projections occur, and projections are different than something else that I talk about, which is called a protective decision. So in some of my other videos, I've talked about protective decisions, which are a decision that we make in response to something that's uncomfortable. So if we answer a question wrong in math class, a protective decision would be, oh, I suck at math. That's a decision that we invented for ourselves, and it's a limiting belief that we then carry with us that hinders our ability to do, be, have, create in the world. But it's different than a projection because a projection is coming from somebody else, and then we forget that it came from somebody else, whereas a protective decision came from us and we forget that we decided it. They're both similar in the sense that we forget that it is not true, and we start operating as if it is true, and it starts limiting our worldview. But they're different because a projection comes from somebody else. And it's important to know the difference between what's a protective decision that you made and what's a projection that came from somebody else, because knowing the source allows you to have more power to question it and get rid of it because you know where it came from. So hopefully that answered your question. For any of you who are just joining us today, we talked about how to delete other people's projections from your own worldview so that you're left with more freedom and more permission to be at peace with yourself, to have fun, to be joyful, to connect, to have whatever you want, etc., etc., etc. If you are just joining us, these will be available both on Facebook and on Instagram, so you can go back and watch the whole thing, and I'll upload it to my YouTube channel, Brandolyn Tebow, so it'll be there forevermore. And also for those who are just tuning in, reminder, today is the last day that you can get the early bird price for our women's retreat that we have in Joshua Tree, December 8th through 10th. It's a mindset medicine retreat. We're gonna walk you through challenging your whole worldview so that we bust it open and you see infinite more possibilities for yourself in your life. We're gonna give you healing yoga, healing breathwork, healing food. It's gonna be in nature. It's gonna be in a group of 20 powerful women. It is going to be a completely transformative, incredible experience, and there's only a few spots left. So if you're interested, direct message me. The link is in my bio. I'd love to have a conversation with you about whether or not that retreat would be a good fit for you. All right. Message me, let me know what you got out of this, or if you're watching on YouTube, comment below, subscribe to my channel. I want to hear your feedback. I want to hear if this made a difference for you or not, and also other requests for what you all would like to be coached on. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a beautiful Wednesday.